Hey everybody. Um, so we're in a bit of a dark time right now, and I think games are a really important thing to have access to help us relax, chill out, socialize, etc., etc. I hope you're all staying well out there and safe. One of my favorite games, my favorite board games, tabletop games, is Gloomhaven. I've been playing it now for about 2 years or so, on and off. I've dedicated a lot more time to it in the last probably 8 months, actually giving a campaign a real try and some dedication. And with the new era of social distancing, we have, of course, been unable to get my group together to play the game in person. And I have been trying to figure out the best way for us to continue playing with this new state of affairs. So I stumbled across the Gloomhaven fantasy setup in Tabletop Simulator. This is a free mod in Tabletop Simulator. You can find it in the workshop. And it was actually very recently updated by its creators, whose names on Steam are Kijan and Gabriel M. I don't know their real names, but I want to first thank the two of them profusely for making this incredibly detailed, thorough mod that has really helped keep our group's playthrough alive and working in many ways, I think at least, better than the physical copy of the game. That's not to say the physical copy of the game isn't great and that you shouldn't all buy it, because you definitely should. And someday this crisis will be over and we can all get together and keep playing in person. But for now, this is, in my opinion, the best way to play Gloomhaven remotely over the internet. So I want to thank both of them for their work, all the other modders who made assets that are part of this mod. There are quite a few of them, and of course Isaac Childress, the creator of Gloomhaven, and all the other people at Cephalofair Games who made this, who made Gloomhaven and made it possible, and are working hard on making Frosthaven happen. The Kickstarter for that goes live on March 31st, which is 2 days from now. Today is March 29th, 2020, so you should all support that. And you should all download this mod, and you should all get Tabletop Simulator too, because it's great and it's a fantastic way not just to play Gloomhaven with friends, but all sorts of games. But Gloomhaven is one of my favorite games, and I really wanted to go over the new version of it, because there's a great tutorial video that was created by Lord Gwydion a few years back. But there are so many changes to this new version that I thought it was worth doing it fresh. Particularly in light of the fact that there are a lot of the same questions in the discussion thread on the workshop page for this mod that are coming up over and over and over again. And I hope that this video can answer a lot of those questions. And in particular, I want to look at this from the lens of somebody who has an existing Gloomhaven campaign, and how you can transition your physical copy of the game into this digital version. I'm also probably going to make a separate video here that goes over how you can update an old version of this mod to a new version, because they're updating it quite frequently with nice quality of life improvements all the time. It is a little bit tedious to do that, but we'll go over that in a separate video. For now, I'm mainly going to be focusing on transitioning from a physical version of the game, how to get things set up, how to get things going, the things you need to modify and pay attention to, a few gotchas that I've noticed through playing with this with my group a few times now. I think we've played maybe 4 or 5 scenarios using this mod. And I'm also going to talk about some of the changes from the version 1 version, and how those impact the game. And I should also mention that I am going to be avoiding as many spoilers for Gloomhaven as I possibly can. I'm just going to be using Scenario 1 and the 6 starting classes and the starting items for demonstration purposes here. So hopefully you don't consider those things spoilers. I'm also not really going to be going into too many of the mechanics for the rules or for how Tabletop Simulator works. There are many great videos for both of those subjects out there if you want to learn more about that kind of thing. So without further ado, let's get started. So first, let's talk about some of the changes from the first version of the mod. So if you never played version 1 of this mod, the overall layout was pretty similar. You still had items over here, characters over here, map, decks, etc., character sheets, and mats down here. But there was a lot more stuff. I think it was 500 or so assets that had to load in every time you launched this mod. And now I think it's 100, maybe 150, definitely less than 200 items that get loaded in the default state here. So it takes way less time to load. It performs way better. Performance is really smooth on my machine. I think that is particularly important now to make this accessible to as many people as possible, so you don't have to have a big beefy PC rig to make this happen and to play it smoothly and reliably. So as much as I did love the aesthetic of that old version, I think right now, in particular in our current state of affairs, it's much more important to have a functional, the most functional version of the game that we possibly can. And this has really streamlined it. It's removed a lot of the extraneous design stuff. It has gotten rid of the atmospheric effects that you could employ previously. It's gotten rid of a lot of the stuff that you would use to set up the game manually. There's still a bunch of that stuff still available. It's actually in the big game box, but it's hidden it, and it's made things work a lot better, in my opinion. If you don't like this version of the mod, I don't know if there's actually a way to go back to the old version if you don't have a save from it. But I would highly recommend you give this version a shot because I think it works great. It has some great quality of life improvements, which we will look at as we go through this. One thing I really did enjoy about the old version was the ability to was the music orbs. There used to be these orbs in each corner of the play area that had some great preloaded music. That's actually still here, but they've now included it in the built-in music player that is in Tabletop Simulator. So when you have this mod loaded, just click music up here, and then you can click playlist, and all of that same music is still here. You can still play it. You can adjust the volume using this slider, and you can, of course, add any of your own music here as well. I think you have to be connected to the internet. I believe this is all cloud-based. Oops. So I'm going to pause that for now. So that's sort of a general overview of what's changed from the previous version of the mod. It's really just about cleaning up the interface. There's some initiative stuff that's also changed now, and we'll talk about this as we go into it. The battle interface works a little bit differently and actually shows you the descriptions of what monsters are going to do. There's probably other stuff that I'm forgetting as well, but we'll address it as it comes up. So let's talk about how you transition from a physical copy of Gloomhaven to this environment. And we will start first and foremost with your party sheet. So if you have a physical copy of Gloomhaven, hopefully you have been updating your party sheet properly, or at least somehow keeping track of the stuff that is on that party sheet. So you can replicate all that stuff here, and we'll call this the good party. We'll just put our location for Gloomhaven. You can specify your party rep, and you will notice that it automatically figures out what the shop modifier price should be. You can add any other notes here. Party achievements, these are all free text fields. The most important thing that's here is the party member section of this sheet, and more specifically the levels that you enter here. So you can really type in anything in these fields for the names. Obviously they should match your real characters, but what's most important is the level. So as I start adding levels here, you can see that it figures out what the average party level is, and from that information, it also figures out what the scenario difficulty will be. For normal, you can click here to go hard, very hard, easy, etc., etc. And this is what it will look at when we actually set up the scenario and how it assigns all of the monster levels. So make sure that as you are leveling up your characters and as you're setting up the game for the first time, either from scratch or from a existing game state, that you are updating this appropriately, and making sure that you have this set based on whatever difficulty level you want to play for any given scenario. So let's then talk about the characters themselves. So you can add players to the game by clicking these Add Players button. Obviously, Gloomhaven can have up to 4. I'm just going to just do 2 here for the purposes of demonstration. And these mats get created automatically. They're great for setting up the game and keeping track of stuff. But what's even better, over here we have our 6 starting classes. You can these are infinity boxes, which means that there are an infinite number of envelopes in each one of these that you can use to do a quick setup for each class. So let's say I'm going to grab the brute here. I can actually drag and drop this envelope on this character mat, and boom, it automatically populates it. We get our normal mat here, our default attack modifiers, trackers, summons, HP tracker, XP tracker, all of the level 1 cards, which are put in your hand by default. And then down here we also have a character sheet, the empty envelope, all of the advanced abilities, and all of the unique class attack modifiers that are here. So you're going to want to do this for each one of the characters that is in your game. That could be any number of characters depending upon how many people you're playing with. Obviously, only 4 people can play Gloomhaven at once, but you might have, multiple sets of characters that multiple players that come in and out who might have different characters. So you're going to want to sort of build this out for each character. So go into your physical box, grab the party sheet, grab the ability pools that you have, grab all of the information you're going to need to recreate each character here. So that's going to include going in and typing in the name, putting in all of the relevant perks, putting in the appropriate XP level. By the way, as far as I know, I don't think there's a way to type in the XP level here. I think you just have to click on it till you get to the right level, but that's okay. But one thing that is nice is when you get up to a level threshold with XP, it automatically marks it out for you. Can you do this? Oh, you sure can. I didn't actually know this. You can just click these things here, and it will automatically put you up to the right level. That's really handy. So good on you guys. Good job. Real good job. You can do the same thing with gold as well, and you can also, these are text fields where you can, a text field I should say, because there's not actually one here under notes. Here is where you can write all your items, any notes you're using to keep track of personal quests. You can also keep track of your check marks and mark all those things off. You're going to want to, assuming your character is not just level 1, you're going to want to put in all of the advanced abilities into your pool of cards that you have available to your character. You're going to want to add any attack modifiers that you have unlocked through perks, and remove any attack modifiers. A lot of these perks involve things like removing -1 cards. So you're going to want to go through here. You can right-click on this deck, click search, and you can pull stuff. That's the wrong one. That's not a -1. Pull a card out very quickly and easily that way. So make sure you do all of that for each character. One other thing you're going to want to do, again, assuming your character is not level 1, these things come out of the box by default as level 1. The character figures in this game, the minis that are available. The minis are only available, by the way, the models are only available for the 6 starting classes. All of the other classes in the game are just standees, which is unfortunate, but you know, it's a free mod. So be thankful for what it is, and it's great for what it is, quite honestly. I'm not complaining at all. But one thing I have seen a lot in the discussion forums discussion thread for this mod is how to adjust the HP for these standees. First of all, it's great that these things have HP bars above them at all. I love that, and I think it makes keeping track of HP levels during the game so much easier, because you don't have to be constantly looking back and forth between monster sheets and your character board, your XP, HP trackers. It's all just right there on the board. So in any event, if you want to modify this to reflect the fact that your character has leveled up and therefore has increased max HP, the way you do it is you click on the HP bar. This then switches over to a max mode, and you can then use these arrows to increase or decrease the HP, the max HP as appropriate. And when you're done, you just click on that bar again, and boom, you're set. And you will see that this updates down here accordingly. One other thing you may want to do is work with enhancements. I wouldn't consider this a spoiler because it's in the manual for the game, even though enhancements are something that you don't have access to at the beginning of the game. If you do consider it a spoiler, then you can skip this part, but I wouldn't consider it as such. So ability cards in Gloomhaven can be enhanced for a frankly absurd amount of money, but you can do that here in this module using the decal system. So if you go over here to the left-hand menu and select decals, you will see that all of the enhancement stickers have been recreated here, and you can grab any of them by just clicking on it and putting it on the appropriate spot on the card. So now that spare dagger has a +1. It's worth pointing out that in Gloomhaven, when you add an enhancement to a card, that card is there for that class for forever for your copy of the game. So even if you retire the character, then you continue to have that enhancement available no matter what. For future versions of the Brute, in this case, that +1 would be available even after my original Brute has retired. So you might then ask, how do you make those things available permanently? Because these infinity boxes, every time you grab a new Brute, it's just going to be a default vanilla version of the Brute without your enhancements. Well, the good news is that there's a quick and easy way to make those changes. So what you would do is grab any cards that you've enhanced. In this case, we'll just take the one spare dagger. And we will then take our vanilla Brute from this box. We're actually going to take this and we're going to copy and we're going to paste it so that there's now a copy of it. So we can move this back to our active version. We're then going to go into this envelope. We can search through it by right-clicking and clicking on search. And we're going to go to our starting abilities. We'll search through that deck. And we'll find the spare dagger. And we can delete it. And we can now put our updated version in its place. And then put this whole deck back in that envelope. Now, we're going to want to select this Brute box. And we'll go over and under toggles, We're going to unlock it, and we're then going to click Reset. We can then take this envelope with our updated enhanced card, and we can drag and drop it onto this box. And that updates the infinity box here. We can then go in and lock it again. And now, anytime we drag a brute starter out of this box, it is going to have that, if we search through here, we can see that the spare dagger has our enhancement. Let's get rid of that and clean it up. So you would want to do that for every class that you have where you have done any kind of enhancement. You don't have to, obviously, but I think in the interest of completeness and thoroughness, that it's something you should do. So once you've got all of your characters set, and just for the sake of getting things set up for some real play here, I'm going to add a scoundrel here as well. And you can see that I'm actually assigned, it defaults the first player in this module to player 2. And this little box here is my hand box, and I can see all the cards in my hand, and you can actually click Alt to see them bigger, which is a nice feature. As you're moving around the board, you always can see your hand. It's important to note as well that the hand, by default, is actually all of the level 1 and level X abilities. So you can move these into another hidden box back here that is, when you put cards in here, it's not visible to other players, but it's not your hand, quote unquote. You can also, if you are playing by yourself with 2 characters, you can go up here, click on your name, click change color, and make yourself the game master. And now none of this stuff is hidden to you. You can see all cards at all times, which is useful if you're playing by yourself. So let's talk about items. So you can see over here all of the items that are available in the game are laid out and nicely organized. The items that are available by default at Prosperity Level 1 and all of the other ones at different Prosperity levels are available here too, as well as all of the random items that you can get in the game, the random blue designs, reward items, and solo items from the solo scenario. So what you should do if you are again attempting to rebuild your physical copy of the game in this environment is look at your bank of items that are available in your shop and move everything manually, one by one if necessary, into this shop offer section. So for demonstration purposes here, and to avoid spoilers, I'm just going to grab the Prosperity 1 items. So once you've got all of your items in this little section, you can click on this shop offer text, which is a button, and it says layout cards. Let me adjust the camera here so you can actually see what happens. So that actually lays out all of the available items here at the top of the game board. And they're nice and organized. They're in order, item 1 starting here and moving up. And it's then quick and easy to move items down to your character and put them in the right slot. You can see you've got all of the appropriate item slots around the edges of your character mat here. Note that there are only 3 slots here for small items, even though it is possible to get more than 3 small items at higher levels. That's just as much room as there is on these mats. You can just put other items off to the side here if you have more than 3 equipped. What's also great about this is you can keep this nice and neat by going down here and clicking on that layout cards button again. It removes everything that's up there, and then you can press it a third time, and it puts everything back, and it eliminates any gaps that you have caused by moving cards around or assigning them to characters, etc., etc. So you can always keep this this bank of items that are, you can think of this as the virtual shop. You can always keep it nice and organized at all times, which is a feature that I really appreciate. So let's continue to talk about characters and getting them all set up appropriately. Next thing we'll look at is personal quests. So over here on the right-hand side of the play area is the personal quest deck, as well as a bunch of other decks that you would typically want to access, and some of these we'll talk about in just a minute. But in the personal quest deck are all 24 of the personal quests that are in Gloomhaven. So you, of course, are going to want to look at each one of the characters that you have in the game and make sure that you grab the correct personal quest card. You can search this deck and go through all those cards and grab them as appropriate. I am not going to focus on them to avoid spoilers. Note that as you are going through this, it's possible that you might end up spoiling yourself to some extent, particularly if you have somebody in your group who doesn't want to share what their personal quest is. I think the acceptable solution here is to at least get them to tell you what the title of their personal quest is, so you can at least just quickly glance at it and see what the title is, and then grab it and place it alongside their character. I like to just keep them down here with all the extra character stuff. When you retire characters in Gloomhaven, you are supposed to remove personal quests from the game, which brings up the topic of stuff that you've removed from the game in general. If you're like me, you haven't been physically destroying or discarding the stuff that you have removed from the game, and you have that all stored away somewhere in an envelope. I have all my stuff that I've removed from the game in an envelope labeled removed from game in my physical copy. And I like to physically recreate that here by creating a little removed from game area. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to go into the Objects menu, go to Components, Tools, and just grab a bag. And you can actually right-click on it, and you can give it a name. You can call it Removed from Game. And we will just take this personal quest and pop that in there. So for any personal quests or anything that you end up removing from the game, you can stick it in this bag, as opposed to physically deleting it. You don't have to do that. You could delete it if you really just want it gone, but I find particularly for situations like this, where you're trying to rebuild your game state, having a record of those things that got removed from the game is really handy. So let's talk about some of these other decks here that you need to update to make sure that your game state is consistent with your physical copy. And first and foremost, City and Road. So here you have nicely laid out for you City and Road events 1 through 30, City and Road events 31 through 69, which are the ones that you haven't unlocked by default. And the same is true with city events. 1 through 30 are the ones that you have unlocked at the start of the game, and 31 through 81 are the ones that you haven't unlocked at the start of the game. If you're starting fresh, then you're good to go. You don't have to worry about that. If you've never done a city event or a road event and this is your first time playing Gloomhaven, then these are set up as they should be. But if you have done even a single scenario where you have removed or modified or in any way changed these decks, you're going to need to make sure these are modified appropriately. So you can just deal them out and rebuild them manually. I think the better way is to go through your physical road deck, just looking at the numbers on the bottom, avoiding reading the details to avoid spoiling yourself, and just making a list of the decks as they exist in the order that they are in your physical copy of the game. You can then go and right-click here, click Search, and you can manually reorganize these by dragging and dropping. Note that the lower numbers are at the bottom and the higher numbers are at the top. And you can drag and drop these and move their order around in this window, which allows you to usually keep the text small enough that it's easy enough to not accidentally read and accidentally spoil yourself. And you would do that for both this deck and this deck to make sure that it's consistent with your physical copy of the game. Speaking of City and Road and how they work in this game, when you do draw them, one particularly useful thing, if you flip these over, you'll notice that the results are blurred out, which is intentional. I've seen people comment on this in the discussion forum. This is so you don't expose yourself to spoilers. This is particularly handy for cards that you're asked to reshuffle back into the deck. Or sorry, typically you don't reshuffle them. Usually you're asked, if you are going to re-add them to the deck, you typically add them to the bottom of the deck. But what you can do here is if you right click, you can change the state. State 1, both the A and B result are obscured. In state 2, the A result becomes visible, and in state 3, the B result becomes visible. So you can just show one of those states without exposing yourself to the other, which is less important if the card's going to get removed from the game, but can be important if you're going to end up putting it back at the bottom of the deck. For me, let's pretend that this did end up getting removed from the game. This is another thing that I might put up here in this removed from game bag, which is really handy for moving your game state from update to update as they put out new updates for this game. You should also, I mentioned, if you want to, you can put active city and road events in these little slots here. It's just for organization. I actually usually don't use these myself, but you certainly can. All right, so next we are going to look at things that you may have unlocked, which is going to include character classes, the envelopes, treasure, and also random dungeons. We'll actually start with the last one of those because we were already looking at decks. So hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but throughout the game you are given as rewards in certain circumstances random dungeons as a reward. And what you are asked to do in that situation is to refer to the random dungeon deck, shuffle it, and draw a card, which unlocks a scenario that you can then sticker on the board here on the map. So in the interest of making sure that this digital version of the game is consistent with your physical copy of the game, you are going to want to make sure that the items that you have, the random dungeons that you've already unlocked, are removed from this deck, so you don't accidentally draw them again as you unlock more and more. So you're going to want to go through your random dungeon deck and make sure that the dungeons that are available in this deck are consistent with ones that the deck that you have in the physical copy of the game. Doing that is going to be easier if you do have a envelope of stuff that you've kept around with your stuff that you've removed from the game. I will mention that doing this is going to expose you to the artwork that is in this deck, and you may consider that a spoiler, but I think it's worth it in the interest of keeping things consistent. Next, let's talk about character classes. So pretty much all of the unlocked content that exists in this module is in the big Gloomhaven box. That doesn't include all the Forgotten Circle stuff, which I should mention I have never played, and I am not going to be going into detail on that stuff. I should mention as well that all of the automatic setup stuff that this mod does not include the Forgotten Circle stuff, so you have to do a lot of that stuff manually. Anyway, character classes. So if we go in here and we search, you can see that there is a bunch of stuff in here, including quick start guide, which I highly recommend you take a look at, a rule book. By the way, if this is in your way, you can click this little button here and get that stuff out of the way temporarily. Scenario book, solo scenarios, the opening conditions for envelopes, which I recommend just getting out right away, and you can start keeping track of stuff by clicking on this as well. You can refer to your manual. Hopefully you've been updating this in your physical copy of your rulebook. I also like getting the rulebook out and setting its page to page 52, just because that has all of the useful information for scenario level, including trap damage, which I refer to pretty often. The town records book is in here, which is something you unlock when the first time you retire a character. All of the locked characters are in here, sealed envelopes, and the treasure deck, as well as map tile and overlays, which you may need if you are setting up a game from scratch, although for the most part you're not going to need to do that, which we'll look at later. And counter tokens, which I think for the most part you don't need as well, but are there if you need them. So let's talk about characters first. So you can grab this envelope, and all of the locked characters are in this, this envelope here. I can right click here and click search and see all of the available unlocked classes. So I can grab one of these, and again, there's no spoilers. It just gives you the non-spoiler names for each one of these, which is nice. So it's really hard to accidentally spoil yourself. And all of these have setup envelopes in them. These are all infinity boxes, and you can, if you want, move them over and line them up with the rest of the starting 6 classes. You could right click and you could select lock if you want to keep them in place. I like to keep this in the box when I'm not using it, just so it doesn't have to load. The next thing I want to look at is the treasure index. So this is very clearly marked as spoilers, although we're not actually going to be seeing any here, and that is great. So if you actually take one of these cards and flip it, you'll notice that it still doesn't show you what the treasure is. You actually have to right click on it and change the state to 2 to see what the treasure is. So when you are playing scenarios in this mod and you are looting treasure, it will actually, we'll look at this when we set up a scenario here later in this video. When you click on the treasure button, it actually grabs the right treasure from this deck and lets you see it live. What I would recommend doing, just in the interests of thoroughness and completeness, is to go through this deck and remove any treasure that you have looted previously. You don't have to do it necessarily, but it could be an issue if you're replaying scenarios you've already played and you just want to make sure that you aren't accidentally looting treasure twice, because in Gloomhaven, once you loot a numbered treasure chest, it is looted forever and you can never loot it again if you replay that scenario. So again, hopefully you have a removed from game envelope somewhere that you've been not throwing away, but even if you don't have that, you should hopefully have at least been keeping track of the treasure that you've looted in the scenario book. It lets you go in and mark those off as you loot them, so you can refer to that and remove the treasure that you've looted from the game. And once you're done, make sure you put this back in the box. And for me, again, I'm just, as an example, going to take this and put it over in my removed from game, if that was one that I had previously looted in my physical copy of the game. So let's also look at the sealed envelopes. These are envelopes in Gloomhaven that you are only supposed to open when certain conditions are met, usually based on things that you do down here. I'm just going to show you where they are first. If you click search in this box, all the sealed envelopes are in here. And again, if we search this, you can see there's envelope B, the open this when you deserve it envelope, A, and X. I'll be upfront about saying that I have not opened A or X. This guy you can open at your own discretion, but I have unlocked envelope B. So here is where I'm going to say that there is going to be a spoiler for envelope B. So I will mark here where you can skip ahead to avoid this spoiler, but I want to mention it just because it's something that wasn't immediately obvious to me, and I think it's worth noting if you have unlocked envelope B in your version of the game. So let's go ahead and grab that. And this is the final spoiler warning for envelope B. We're going to be looking at its context right now. So if we grab the card from envelope B and flip it, you'll notice that there's actually a button here, and I did not notice this, and I thought for the longest time that there was no good way to keep track of your donations on the map here. But if you click this button, ta-da, it actually adds that to the board, and you can keep track of donations much as you would in the physical copy of your map board. So that is something I did not realize, and I think it's worth sharing. So for those of you that wanted to avoid the envelope B spoilers, you are now back in the safe zone. I'm going to put that away and put these sealed envelopes back in the box. So the last thing you're going to want to update here to get your digital game state consistent with your physical game state is the map. So there's three things you want to update here. Number one is prosperity. So you can mark that much as you would on the physical copy of the game. Quick and easy. You can also add global achievements. You can do that by clicking anywhere up at this part of the map. And all of the global achievement stickers appear here, and you can click on the one you want to add, and it will automatically add it to the board in the right place. This is the one that starts off Gloomhaven when you open it for the first time. Finally, you are going to want to add the stickers for scenarios that you have unlocked. And we're just going to do scenario 1, the Black Barrow. And if we click on the button for it, you can see it adds that sticker. You can click it again to mark it as complete. You can click it a third time if you accidentally did that for some reason. You can also double click to quickly set up that scenario, although I don't like to do it that way, and we'll be looking at how you do that the way I do prefer to do it in just a second. And you can triple click to mark this with a red X if it's a scenario that for some reason you don't have access to anymore in your campaign. So you would then do this for every scenario that you've unlocked. You can, if you need to, move, column by column or row by row to make sure you get everything that you've unlocked appropriately. You could also refer to the scenario book if you've been keeping track of which ones you've completed and marking them appropriately. So that is pretty much it as far as making sure your game state in this mod is consistent with the digital version. It's possible I've overlooked some stuff, and what you may also want to do, if you do have that physical removed from game envelope that I keep referencing, comparing it with one that you make here and making sure that all of the treasure, all of the city and road event cards, all of the random dungeon cards, or anything else that you've been asked to remove from game, completed personal quests, etc., are all in there, and that those are all consistent and match. That's a quick and easy way to make sure that you've done stuff right. Okay, so you have successfully recreated your physical Gloomhaven game state in this digital environment. Congratulations, it probably took some time and some effort.